I'll go too.
Good to go? Right, good. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Abbey Centre, and also welcome to those of you joining us online, because this is our first fully hybrid open forum event. We've had over 200 people register, which is absolutely fantastic. I know we're still, people are still joining us, and hopefully those numbers will increase. But thank you all very much for giving up your time and for joining us this evening. My name is Stuart Love. I'm Westminster City Council's Chief Executive. Your panel tonight, who will be fielding your questions, are the Leader of the Council, Councillor Rachel Robertson, Councillor David Harvey, who is our Cabinet Member for Housing, Councillor James Spencer, who is our Cabinet Member for City Management, and Dr. Amy Jones, who is our Director of Environment. The focus for tonight's open forum is on the climate emergency and how together we can tackle that. We will be taking questions that will alternate between those in the room and those joining us online. For the people in the room, there will be roving microphones, so if you wouldn't mind just waiting until the microphones arrive. And when they do, if you could just state your name before posing your questions. We do want to get through as many questions as possible, so if you could please just keep your questions short and to the point, that would be incredibly helpful. Again, for those of you who are in the room, there is no fire alarm planned for this evening, so if the alarm does go off, please just look to see where your nearest emergency exit is, follow the emergency exit, and the muster point is across the road outside. And with that, I'm going to hand over to the Leader of the Council, Councillor Robertson, who's just going to say a few words.
Thank you. I will, a very few words. Thank you very much, all of you who've actually come out tonight, and thank you for those who are joining us online. We really appreciate seeing you, either virtually or in person. And it feels to me like it's a really good time to be having another open forum, with the city beginning to reopen, hopefully with COVID in the past. We can really talk again about all the work that we've been continuing to do to drive our core agenda of delivering more homes, improving the services for those in our housing, making sure our young people have the best start in life, delivering jobs and supporting the economy, which is so vital after the period that we've had. We all know what a tough period it's been, and that's important for jobs and the futures of our young people in particular. But of course, tonight we're also going to focus on the green agenda and what we're doing as a city council around the climate emergency. And the most important thing I'd say here is that, and you won't often hear a politician say this, but I really don't have all the answers. In fact, I don't have many of the answers, but we are really working hard on this. And the reason I say that is because this has to be a partnership of the City of Westminster, because I am well aware that for our residents this is a really important issue. You will have ideas, you will have knowledge, you will have things that you can suggest that we do differently, or that your neighbours can do differently, your communities can do differently. And so that's what I really want to stress, that, you know, we can talk tonight about what we're doing as a city council around our planning laws, around retrofitting, around all sorts of other things. But this has got to be, if we're going to meet our commitment to be zero emissions as a city by 2040, this isn't just about the council, this is about all of us. We have a really critical role to play as a convener, and believe me, we are absolutely driving ahead on that. But it's about all of us. So we're actually going to, in this hall, be having another Community Action Day focused on climate action on the 26th of February. Please do come. We held one in the north of the borough a few months ago, and it was great. People coming along with lots of ideas and lots of suggestions of things, and to showcase stuff. And it was a really good session. So please put that in your diary as well. Anyway, let me hand back.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Just before I take the first question, I just want to say we've had quite a few questions submitted to us that are very specific. I've just seen some of them coming through. Some of them relate to individual properties and planning matters related to those properties. We won't be able to answer those questions tonight. However, anything that we don't answer through the panel, we will make sure we get directly in contact with people who submitted those questions and provide answers. So the first question I'm going to go to has been submitted to us by Annabella. And the question is, when can we have food waste disposal more widely available in Westminster? And I think, Councillor Spencer, you're probably best placed to answer that.
Thank you, Stuart. Look, getting food waste right is really, really important. I'm not sure if you know, but roughly a third of the rubbish that we throw away as a city is food waste. And so that is 3,000 tonnes of food waste a year, and that's 300 tonnes of CO2. So rolling out food waste has been a real priority for this council. So it's fantastic that we'll be rolling out food waste, or the rollout will start at the end of this month. And it's starting at the north of Borough, and it's going to progress throughout the rest of the city and be completed by the end of the year. And the food waste collected is going to be taken to a plant in Hertfordshire and into what they call an anaerobic digester and turned into natural gas which is sustainable and gas which can heat our homes.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Any questions from the floor? I think the first hand I saw was there.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. A number of questions, but I'll just keep it to one this time. Is that what do you collectively think is the most radical thing that this council have done regarding this matter?
Well, let me start on that. I'm not sure about radical, but let me talk about what I think are the most important things that we need to do. We need to do a lot around improving recycling rates because...
So not will do, but have done.
Have done. Okay, no, absolutely. So we have done stuff to improve recycling rates. We have done things to make sure that driving green cars, electric cars, is much easier. We've got more EV charging points than any other borough. But I think for us, in our position, 86% of our emissions come from our buildings. I think the most important things that we have done and will continue to do, but that we have done is already to implement an environmental supplementary planning document to embed sustainability much more at the core of what we're doing around our buildings, how we live in them, how we use them, but also how we develop them. There's much more to come on that. As I say, I'm not sure about the word radical, but that is going to be the key, I think, to tackling this in our city. We have to address the built environment, how we build it, how we deliver it. We've already done a lot, but I recognise we need to do more, which we are doing.
Thank you. Apologies to those online. I think I might have been a disembodied voice because I was standing in the wrong place. So hopefully I can now be seen. Just building on the theme of the leader mentioned recycling, we've had another question come in online from Sarah, and the question being, how can we make recycling easier and more convenient for everybody in Westminster? And I think probably Councillor Spencer, one for you.
Yeah, so when I was the deputy in this role back in 2020, when Rachel first asked me to be the deputy cabinet member for city management, the first thing she asked me to do was to do a year-long review in waste and recycling, and with the aim of how we can make it easier for people to recycle. And over that year, we looked at all the different ways, all the different options, from providing more bins, from providing a variety of different recycling opportunities, and to how we deliver food waste. Because to go back again to food waste, it really is the key to driving up our recycling rates. And talking about a radical approach, I think the approach that we're taking to food waste in Westminster probably is one of the most innovative ways that any local authority is tackling food waste. Given the challenges that we face as being like the capital of the capital and inner London borough, we've got many, many diverse communities, both in terms of density and population layout. And we've devised a system which is bespoke almost to every single street in this country for food waste. And as I said, that is different to how any other local authority has approached such an issue as food waste. And for us, given the importance of it, as I said, it's a third of the rubbish we throw away, that's why we've taken such a radical approach to it.
Okay, thank you. I think the next hand I saw was a gentleman at the back of the room.
Different subject. What is the council policy regarding particularly new builds and later retrofitting the installation of heat pumps in buildings? Because that's a way to reduce your carbon footprint and a very efficient way to heat buildings.
It's a policy question. Councillor Harvey, just looking at you, given there are housing implications here.
So, in fact, we have 4 pilots under the way at the moment, just starting with heat pumps, to see how effective they can be for small blocks, we're applying for quite a lot of government money, relatively speaking, for bigger projects. So if you wanted something radical, though I like innovative rather than radical, I'm not that radical, we're looking at our entire social housing stock. And we're not just doing the standard thing of saying much more insulation, we're looking at all the new technologies. So that goes from taking out very old large boilers to very small and effective electric ones, which are efficient in so many ways, right through to heat pumps along the Thames, right through to individual heat pumps on buildings. I've got some figures in my briefing I've looked through for this, looking at a cost at the moment, it might be £3,000 per flat or building per heat pump. Over the next 5 years, that may come down considerably. So we're looking at air-based, we're looking at water-based, any technology we can use. We're very keen on using the river. It's there, it's a natural resource. But we'd like to be in a place where in a year to come, and I can't say when yet, we aren't using gas unless it is, as James said, it's something which we've actually generated naturally. We'd like to be in a place where any electric that we get comes from sustainable sources. I can't yet, and I would not commit, the leader might kill me, talk about Rolls-Royce and their mini nuclear power stations, but I think being realistic, we've got 20,000 social homes, all of which we have to retrofit, and there are 20,000 plus other social homes with other social landlords. And then on top of that, we have to have viable and radical technologies for 37,000 private homes and about 45,000 other rented homes, all of whom over the next 25 years will want to, or will need to, or will have to use the latest science and techniques to retrofit a building. So we've got a team of boffins who are working on this. I can't pretend we know a tenth of what we need to know yet, but you have to start somewhere.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Going back to online questions, we've had a question coming from Kim, and this question, I think, sets out the scale of the challenge we're facing. So the question is, the bulk of greenhouse gas emissions in Westminster stem 37% from public buildings, 34% from commercially used buildings, 15% from housing. In other words, 86% of emissions come from buildings. What will the council do to tackle the bulk of the emission sources? And actually, Amy, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, before going to the members.
Yeah, so there's a whole swathe of things I think we need to do to incentivise and encourage emission savings from the built environment, and it is the biggest challenge that we face, and we totally recognise that. I think firstly, in terms of new development, we've created a planning policy now which is much more focused on driving emission saving from a whole life carbon perspective. So from a sort of the technical perspective, that includes embodied carbon associated with construction and demolition, as well as operational carbon associated with the use of that building over its lifetime. So within the city plan and the ESPD that the leader referred to, we have really clear guidance about trying to achieve or incentivise net zero carbon development and incorporating all the associated emissions with that. And retrofitting is a huge part of that, and we're really keen to address any misconceptions that there's really difficult planning barriers to be overcome in improving the energy efficiency of your property. So you mentioned air source heat pumps, for example. That is permitted development, except in certain circumstances where it may be in a conservation area or an area of a building which is listed. And obviously, it's really important to get direct planning advice about any sort of specific interventions, but there are a whole host of things that individuals and businesses can do to improve the energy efficiency of properties. And we're really keen to improve the guidance around that, making sure that's really accessible online. We're working with the EcoFurb initiative, which is offering end-to-end advice to residents in relation to kind of whole house retrofitting. We have a green doctor service that can provide advice on energy efficiency and in doing so reducing fuel bills. So there's kind of a whole system approach that we need to take in terms of driving low carbon development and new developments, in terms of driving retrofitting of existing developments and ensuring that there's really clear guidance around that.
I was just going to add on that. I think, just very quickly, I think one of the really things that often comes up with us is about people just wanting to know how to make their buildings more efficient. And so a big part of what we're going to be doing is just what we're internally labelling how-to guides, but just having a way of pulling together, and it won't all be our information by any stretch of the imagination, but having the information to enable our residents to make their buildings, their flats, their houses as energy efficient as possible. And as I said before, we won't have all the answers to this. So I really would hope that this is going to be an interactive process, that some of our residents, our landowners and other people will be able to say, this is a really important piece of research here, or this is an important thing, but also signposting towards grants, etc., that may be available to help people with this.
Thank you. I think the next hand I saw was yours.
Thank you. I'm Stephanie and live down the road. Talking about the people you've got working on some of the challenges around retrofitting our buildings and EcoFurb. EcoFurb came and did a survey for me before Christmas, and I've been advocating with my landlord that he invests in this kind of thing, which took a bit of guts to build up. One of the challenges we've come across is nobody's been on our roof for a really long time. There are limits to whether you can fly drones within Westminster for understandable reasons. And I know Nikki Aiken's been doing lots of work on that with regard to police helicopters and replacing those with drones. I don't know how damaged my roof is and whether we can put solar panels on top. Everyone on my street has no idea how damaged their roof is, and I would assume that most of Westminster has no idea how damaged their roof is. How can the council help with this kind of information for all residents that would help them understand what do I need to know about the rest of the infrastructure of my building, the places I can't see, to help with this transition and help provide this information to either private homeowners or to landlords?
Does anybody want to field that?
I think if I can entirely see what you're asking, but I think if, obviously, I think this is in the area of the surveyors. I don't think that's something that we would be able to advise on.
Things where it benefits
massively.
Sorry, if you don't, I'm supposed to be chairing, not answering questions, but if you don't mind, we are looking at technology that's in use in other parts of the world that looks, it's specifically actually around solar, that looks at the top of buildings and what can and can't be done. But as the leader has said, that's not something that we currently do, but we are currently looking, working with some of our technology partners to see what we can do to look across Westminster at our roofs and how they could be used, and then we'd make that information available. But we are some way off being in that position.
And actually also, sorry, I was just going to butt in again. We're doing, Amy's involved in a great piece of work with a number of our bigger landowners in Westminster, which is really pulling together a partnership. Actually, perhaps this is something that we can raise with them and find out what they're doing, because there might be some learning from that we can sort of pass back and have as part of our information sharing.
I think Councillor Harvey and Amy both want to say something.
So in social housing, because we have large estates, large areas, we actually are having a couple of drones going up. It is going to be different and I think a bit more difficult if you're in roads with lots of properties, but I think that could be the start. If it works there, then I suspect lots of other local authorities are going to be asking exactly the same question. I know they are. So to me, that would be a direction of travel. And I must say, thinking of a similar situation, I wouldn't want to get on your roof without a drone, because what situation's it in?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of stepping back slightly in terms of the approach that we're looking at for the whole of the borough, we very much recognise, I guess, after the proportion of emissions that are associated with the built environment and addressing that through kind of retrofit and improvement of the building itself. The second biggest challenge is the supply of electricity and how renewable that is. And in Westminster in particular, I think something like 0.03% of our electricity or energy comes from renewables. So we recognise that that's quite a poor situation that we really want to improve on. So we do have wider plans to look across the whole borough and develop a local energy action plan, which should identify some of the opportunities in terms of rooftop solar PV from a borough-wide level. That doesn't necessarily address your specific question about your property, and I think this is a combination of that kind of large-scale approach, looking at opportunity, as well as how we can support the installation and the advice and support around that through working with people like EcoFurb, or we also work with a scheme called Solar Together, which is about a group buying platform for solar PV, which again uses vetted contractors, and whether they can offer or whether we can extend that service to look at how we can better facilitate the process with the challenges as you're mentioning.
Thank you. Going to the next online question, I'll come back to you shortly. My question is from Nicola. And hello, Nicola. Given the Council recognises that we are in a climate emergency, can you suggest why it is so difficult to get more on-street cycle parking, and in particular secure cycle parking, hangars installed in central Westminster? I'm a resident in West End Ward, and I think, James, that would be one for you.
One of the issues we have for many things across the city is space, but we are committed to increasing the number of these secure cycle hangars across the city. We've got the first consultation has taken place, and I know that the next wave are currently being installed across Westminster, but it's something that's constantly under review. And so I would say to anyone, if they know a space, if they can identify an area where they want secure cycle hanger storage, get in touch with us and we'll do all we can to investigate the possibilities and hopefully put one in there.
Great, thank you very much.
Tim Lord from the Soho Society. I just wanted to come back to what Amy was saying on this issue of demolish and rebuild as opposed to retrofitting and refurb. We've had an application running in Soho since 2018, I think, for the demolition of 20th Century House in Soho Square, which is a very large, substantial 1937 building. And the Soho Society's objected both on heritage and environmental grounds. And actually, we were really impressed by what came out of the city plan, because halfway through that application, the city plan came in, and that the poor old applicant then had to submit a great deal more information on the embedded CO2 implications of demolition and rebuild. I think it was 13,000 kilograms of CO2 will be released by the demolition and rebuild, and our estimate of the refurb is like 3,000 or something. And obviously we'll continue to put our evidence in for that particular application. But the thing that struck me was that although the information is now revealed, it's not clear to me that there's any binding legal obligation or anything approaching that in the city plan on the council to actually commit to decisions which move in the direction of carbon neutrality. So because it's only a guidance and a target, there's a risk that if the decision doesn't go the way the applicant wants, because they're well funded and they've invested a lot of money in this, they'll just their legal rights mean they have a good chance of appeal. And my point being that do we need to move, or is there something already there which will allow the city plan to move to a legal basis on getting to net zero rather than just an aspiration?
Thank you. I think the leader of the council
Can I come in on this? Obviously, you'll appreciate I can't discuss specific examples. There's a challenge for us, which I'm going to be really honest about, because we all understand that it would be, and you mentioned a specific site, it would be much more environmentally sustainable and help us much more with the green agenda if buildings were not demolished. However, we, as a city, as a local authority, have to balance various agendas. And we have to be honest about this. So, for example, I think everyone here will know that we have huge pressure on housing. We have very long waiting lists of families who are in overcrowded housing, who are in temporary accommodation, and we need to deliver more housing. The only way, I'm talking about for the local authority, the only way that we can deliver more housing on our own sites is by demolishing what we have and building again more densely. So not far from here, Ebury Bridge, we had a scheme which we had an estate which had about 387, I think it was, flats on it. It's being rebuilt as we speak, demolished and rebuilt. It will deliver almost 800 homes, over half of which will be affordable. The entire site will have a 90% less carbon footprint than what is there at the moment, and it will repay its carbon, embedded carbon, within 11 years. So that's pretty good. However, that does involve demolition. So what I'm saying is that it would be very difficult for us as a city, and you know I'm talking about for us, but there will be the need for other redevelopments to support, you know, housing from other people, other uses that we need in the city. So there will need to be some balance, although we recognise, and I'm glad you appreciate that it's really strongly put in the city plan, we recognise that it is better, very much better from a sustainable standpoint to refurbish, retrofit and refurbish buildings wherever we can, but sometimes that will not always be possible within the wider challenges of a city like Westminster to deliver the other needs that we have.
Thank you. We are getting quite a few questions coming in online on a similar theme, some quite specific around planning and listed buildings. Hopefully, Heidi, in particular, your question has been answered, but feel free to post in the chat if you feel it hasn't, and I will ask it. So going back to another online question with a slightly different flavour to it, and it's about engine idling. Westminster used to provide small flyers which could be given by residents to cars or trucks idling as part of their Don't Be Idle campaign. What is happening regarding this campaign, and could residents be provided with flyers, as idling is a major source of sound and pollution or emissions? So, Councillor Spencer.
Absolutely. I know the Don't Be Idle campaign, when it was first launched, was really quite successful in getting people to stop idling their cars. Absolutely, I'd be more than happy to continue to issue residents with those, especially around some of our new school streets as well, because those are the areas which really matter in terms of protecting children and young people's lungs from some of the most pollutant toxic fumes.
And here, sorry to butt in, but here once again it's where I'd be delighted to get some more flyers out to you, and I'm delighted that you're wanting to use them. That's great, because this once again is where we all need to work in partnership, because we can certainly, and with our city inspectors and with our officers, we can be asking people to switch off their engines, but we're not there on every street the whole time. And if all of our residents were to take some of the literature that we provide and very politely ask people to switch off their engines, it's part of a team effort, which would be fantastic.
Thank you. Maria, there you go. If you want some flyers, let us know where you are, or come to us and we'll give them to you. Great. Okay, so next question, I think, from the gentleman here at the front. Oh.
Andy Beverley, Hyde Park Estate Residents, Hyper. I'm sure everyone here will agree with me that it's important to give residents the choice, should they wish to leave their cars at home and walk or cycle instead. In order to do that, though, those residents must have at least some roads that are safe and that have low traffic. And actually, this is one of the few policy areas that the local authority has 100% control over. Just over 1 year ago, you proposed a scheme to do exactly this on the Hyde Park estate. There was strong local support, as you know, although the scheme was not implemented because there was some local opposition. Now, some of that local opposition supported the scheme in principle, and they would have just liked to see some minor alterations to it. After the scheme was shelved, we were told that local residents would be reconsulted to produce a new scheme with majority support. It's been over a year now, and as far as I'm aware, nothing's happened. So my question is, what date can I give my members for when you will start a new public consultation on an updated scheme?
I'm not sure about the date, Andy, but what I can say to you is that actually Heather Acton, your ward councillor, but also cabinet member, and I were walking the streets of the Hyde Park estate, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, with James and Raj Mistry, our Executive Director for the Environment, to look at all the issues around there. You're absolutely right. There's a big challenge. How do we stop rat running through the estate, largely residential? And it's clear, you know, you only have to stand on some of these streets and you can see the flow of traffic using it as a cut through. How do we do that without merely throwing that traffic into other streets? So there's a lot of, excuse the pun, there's a lot of moving parts to take into account here. It hasn't been shelved. I think what we recognised was that there was very strong opinion on both sides, and we needed to go away and do more work on it. So all I can say to you, Andy, is I can absolutely assure you that the work is ongoing. As I said, I was there, spent 2 hours walking the streets myself a couple of weeks ago, and we will be bringing that back, but I haven't got a specific time for you.
Thank you. Next question online from Mustafa is, much of the housing stock in Westminster is not owner-occupied. What is the council doing to get landlords, particularly of mansion blocks, to make properties more carbon and energy efficient? I know, Councillor Harvey, this is something you've been looking at.
One of the issues that we have, everyone, is it's actually, oddly, it's relatively easy over a 20-year period for us to have a plan for our housing. It's relatively easy for us to go to other social landlords and say, you should have a plan for your housing. But it becomes more difficult dealing with individual homeowners. At one end, you'll have people who simply haven't got the money, and we have to find ways to help them. At the other end, you're going to have people, actually, individual landlords, are really perhaps not so keen on playing ball properly. Now, we have introduced, in a different area, a range of new regulation for houses in multiple occupation over the last 18 months, simply to make sure that those landlords with a number of people in mixed areas are safe, and that people staying in those homes for whatever period of time know there's good fire safety. We have pretty good rules as well against other blocks of private housing which may have fire safety issues. But how we get people to actually start to get those up to a proper environmental standard is going to be a mixture of coaching, of leadership. We don't know yet at what point the government may say it has to happen. Just as we have various potential sources of funding that may come from government, we haven't got timescales yet. We will have to come to a point when to any private accommodation which is rented, there will need to be a regulation and a licensing scheme. Otherwise, we're never going to get a large part of our stock to where it needs to be. So, as a local authority, our power is a bit limited here, but as a champion of change, working with other landlords, working with, in fact, we were talking I've had approaches directly from private housing blocks in my ward saying, we don't know how to do this, please come and tell us how. And we're going to focus particularly on giving people the help and advice they need. What will it cost over what period? What are the best technologies? We won't have all the answers too. We'll learn from those housing blocks too. There'll be experts, people with common sense and knowledge, so we can gradually build an entire raft of knowledge about how anyone can work with us or with other housing owners to make their homes green. But I suspect there's going to be a hard core who in the end will have to be told in a few years' time, you have X number of years, and that may have to be the way that it goes. Government too will have to help those, I think, in the most difficult situations to fund some of that work.
Thank you. Amy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to add another point in relation to kind of private landlords, we have got an action in our climate action plan which talks about piloting approaches for better enforcement of government's minimum energy efficiency standards, and this is about raising the energy performance of properties up to a minimum of a band E. So we are looking at trying to trial approaches to better enforce those standards for private landlords, as well as the work that Councillor Harvey's just mentioned around social landlords.
Next question in the room.
My name's Sue Kay. You were talking before about recycling, and I think in some areas you're a victim of your own success, because I go past areas where there are large multiple bins for different types of recycling. In Lisson Grove, for example, on the corner of Chalbert Street and St John's Wood Terrace. And inevitably, whatever day of the week, whatever time of the day, those bins are overflowing, and there is a lot of stuff dumped around it, on top of it, and it's very unsightly and probably not very sanitary. So I wondered if it's possible for the council to review the number of recycling points that they have and see if you can add some more recycling bins so that you can do away with this pretty nasty looking thing. The one thing I don't know how you do, I wish I could, like Rachel, there's some things you just don't know. How do you get people to put things in the right bin? They're quite clearly marked, and yet you see clothing peeking out of the things that say cardboard and so on. But in general terms, I just don't think there are enough bins, enough general recycling points, and it does look really nasty.
Councillor Spencer.
That's an excellent point, Stuart. It's one of the things we're actively looking at the moment. The big black bins we have across the city are vital for many residents, especially when you've got big Victorian townhouses convert into many flats. And just the sheer density and number of people, we need that extra bin storage so that we don't have rubbish piling up on the street on collection days. But we are having a strategic review of how we use them, how they're designed. I mean, one of the things that we're trialling imminently, I think it's starting in the next couple of weeks, is designing cardboard-specific big black bins. Because one of the issues that we had with the recycling big black bins is that people would just throw full cardboard boxes in and they would fill up really quickly. And they don't flatten them. And then that leads to what you were talking about with people leaving the rubbish around them. So this new design is like this large letterbox, effectively, which forces people to flatten it and slot the cardboard in, which should, hopefully, reduce some of the overfilling of the recycling bins. So we're taking a really innovative approach about how we're tackling this. We're also looking at smart bin technology as well, so bins that sort of recognise that they're getting too full and it sort of sends signals out that they need to be emptied. So there are lots of things that we're doing, but we are taking a really close look at this.
Thank you. Going back to the online questions, Ryan's asked a question about a really topical issue. So the question is, what near-term policies will the Council pursue to alleviate the impact of the cost of living crisis, and what longer-term environmental policies will the Council introduce to ensure the most vulnerable are protected from future energy price shocks by having more insulated homes? And I'd suggest probably one for the Leader and Councillor Harvey.
Yes, look, I am extremely concerned about the fact that we have coming down the road at us, well, inflationary pressures, but also fuel price increases. And this is going to really hit people, and particularly people on lower incomes, pensioners, people on benefits. It's going to hit them hardest. And we've done an analysis in Westminster, and we think about a quarter of our residents are going to face a hit of about 8% plus from this. So we have already put on our website, I hope that you will have noticed this, but please try and encourage other people to look at it, some web pages with all sorts of information on it around places where you can get advice, where you can signposting for help, etc. Around this. We're also, I mean, obviously the only tax that we have that is in our control is the council tax. And this is precisely why it has always been so important for us in Westminster that we have fought to keep council tax low. It's the lowest in the entire country. And the reason why that is so important, and I actually represent, sadly I can't afford to live there, but I represent quite an affluent ward, Knightsbridge and Belgravia, and quite often on the doorstep people will say to me, why don't you put up council tax? Because actually, you know, it would help with money for this, that and the other. And I say, because it's not people like you who would really suffer from it because of the way the council bands work. It's the people on the lowest income. If we were to put up council tax, it goes up across the board in the bands, and it's the people on the lowest incomes in Westminster who would suffer. That's why we have kept council tax as low as we have. So we are doing everything we can to make sure that we're doing that, and also to provide as much information. You also mentioned retrofitting. This is why it's important that we are pushing ahead. We've already, we've just started with this, but we've already retrofitted, I think it's the first 100, the worst of our properties, but we are pushing as fast as we can. And believe me, this is a very expensive process to retrofit all of our social housing stock, but I'm very pleased to say that we were, David mentioned the 5 billion fund that the government announced. We were the first council in the entire country to bid against that because we'd already done our homework. We knew what we needed in Westminster. And we will chase every grant that we can to make sure that we are able to progress this as quickly as possible, because it will have, improving the energy efficiency of our homes, will have a direct benefit to people in Westminster.
So the core element of making our homes carbon friendly is actually insulation. It's that simple. And people have come and asked me in the private sector, what technology do I need? Do I need a heat pump? Do I need photovoltaic panels? And often we just walk in and say, actually, you need new windows, you need insulation. It's often very simple. People just need to know how. So we'll be taking our entire stock and insulating it. But one of the challenges there is the conversation. I can't remember the name of the frame, but the insulation frame you put into a flat means every room becomes smaller. That's just the nature of insulation. So we're going to have some quite difficult conversations with people just to bring them to the point of saying, I did want insulation, but I'm not so sure now. And that's just the nature of consultation and discussion and persuasion. You've got to have people trust you. Moving more quickly then to the immediate measures we can take, we know how tough it's going to be for people over the next few months. So, first of all, we do have the lowest council tax in England, but beneath that, that big figure, there are a range of things that we do. We have the biggest package of helps, exemptions, discretions, certainly in London, possibly across, or we might be the top 3 in the UK, they don't have all the data. So even looking at something like council house rents, even if there is a small increase, we'll probably find that between 50 and 70% of people have a very low impact from that, because there are all sorts of ways we've lined up to say, if you're unwell, if you're in education, if you've got a number of children, if you have a disability, if you have a special need while you're training for a job, then we'll find a way of cutting that bill.
Thank you. Coming back to the room, just before both of you ask questions, happy to come back to you, but does anybody else in the room want to ask something before? No? Okay, good. Over to you.
Sorry, I feel rather guilty. The second question. My name is Luke Douglas-Hume. Two very quick questions. One is, what do you do regarding your MSW, municipal solid waste, and are you calm about that? Are you calm about it? And secondly, how are you communicating what you do to school pupils?
Good question.
Let me take the second one. I might actually ask Amy or James to take the first part of that. It's really important, actually, that we engage with school pupils around this whole agenda, and I'm amazed how knowledgeable they are. I go and attend special assemblies, etc., and they really keep me on my toes, the questions they ask. Actually, it's really interesting how engaged children are. And I can tell you, it's like sort of joke against myself, but when I became leader, my daughter, who was 20 at the time, said to me, Mum, if you want the vote of anyone under the age of 25, you've got to be absolutely serious about climate change. And she's right, because it's the young people, I think, who really understand how important this is, because it's their future, quite frankly. That's why it's so important. So we have a climate education programme, which we are running, not rolling out, we have rolled out, which goes into schools and helps support the schools in terms of working with the children to raise awareness. We also have had, actually it was great, recently a climate action competition with children drawing posters, and some of which were fantastic, writing poems and all this sort of thing, but it's just to engage. And what I really hope, one school I visited last week, one of the children came up with this idea. They were only about 7 or 8, and they came up with the idea of, why don't we have a competition to within the school to design a poster that we can take home and put above our parents' bins, so that they know what they can recycle and what they can't. And I thought, what a fantastic idea, because actually it was with my daughter. It was her that kept saying to me, Mum, you can't throw that in the bin, you've got to recycle it. So what a great idea. So the children are coming up with these brilliant ideas, and we're doing a lot to engage with them.
And just building on that, I was this week looking at one of our brand new school streets I mentioned earlier, and I went to speak to some of the young kids beforehand, and the head teacher was asking questions about, ask the councillor what he does, and the 3 questions that were asked were all about the environment. And in fact, one of them was that exact question that you've just asked, was what happens to our rubbish that we don't recycle? And the answer is that it goes to a facility called Cell Chip, where it is incinerated and converted into electricity. On the face of it, that doesn't sound like it has the best carbon benefit, but the facility there is really quite high-tech in terms of the way the energy is produced. But on the back of that, just going to your earlier point about the radical things that Westminster is doing, Westminster is leading the way. In fact, it's probably the first local authority in the world, at least Europe, that is seeking to close the energy loop between our non-recyclable rubbish and the energy that we produce from it. And the way we're doing that is through our fully electric fleet of waste collection vehicles. So as a council, we have purchased some land near Selchip, and hopefully in August this year, we will be launching our charging facility there, where we will be charging our electric bin lorries from the energy created from the burning of the rubbish that they have just emptied into the incinerator. And as I said, it's going to be the first local authority, at least in Europe, that is closing that energy loop. And it's something that's really quite exciting.
Okay, going back online and sticking with you, Councillor Spencer, this is something you and I were discussing just last week. The question from Gillian: most electric vehicle chargers in the borough require you to be plugged in for several hours and are in non-designated parking spaces. More often than not, they are occupied by non-electric vehicles. When will you tackle this problem and give electric vehicle owners decent access to the infrastructure?
Absolutely, and we had this conversation when you very kindly came and walked around my ward of Tatchbrook. Look, Westminster is leading the way in terms of EV infrastructure. We're going to have 1,500 EV charging points, and I think most residents at some point will be between 3 and 4 minutes walk from their nearest EV charger. But again, this problem is coming up, and we as a council are looking at ways in that we can designate those sites for electric vehicles. So this is something we are actively looking at.
Sorry.
This wasn't part of the question, but I'm just going to jump in anyway, because the other thing that we haven't talked about is commercial vehicles on our roads and how we switch those across. So James has mentioned about our own waste fleet, which is really important, that they will all be, all of our domestic waste fleet will be electric by the end of this year. But what do we do around the rest of the vehicles? We know anyone standing outside on our streets will see endless vans and delivery vans going past the whole time. So we have already started to roll out a specific EV charging points for commercial vehicles so that they can book those, so that people will know, that van drivers, that they will know they can come into Westminster with an electric vehicle, they can charge an EV charging point so they can be confident that they can bring an electric vehicle rather than a petrol or diesel one into Westminster, charge it up and go away again. That is really important. We've also delivered a micro-distribution hub in Park Lane, and we're looking at sites for other ones to enable last-mile electric vehicle delivery. This is all part of how we look at how we electrify the rest of the vehicles on our roads, reduce, hopefully, some of that traffic, but also make whatever the traffic is on our roads as electric as possible, wherever possible. So the EV charging points for residents, really important. We're rolling that out, and please, you know, all of our residents, we encourage them, if you want to apply for an EV charging point in an area that isn't covered, you can do so via our website, and we will look and see if we can accommodate that to make sure that we can do that. But we're also now working to make sure that we have an EV charging network in place for our delivery vehicles to hopefully make it as easy as possible, encourage twist arms, etc., so that more and more of the delivery vehicles in Westminster are also electric.
And also, just to jump back in on that, the part of the question about cars taking a long time to charge on the trickle chargers, as a city, we are increasing the number, or rather radically, of the number of rapid chargers we have as well. And we're looking at space that the council owns, as in car parks and areas in our estates, that we can install these rapid chargers across the city.
Thank you. Back to the room. Another question from you, sir.
Yes, back to recycling. Had the council know of or considered using the facility for recycling as used in Montpellier in France, where they have a unit which is in the ground, which people put, it puts in like a letterbox, and when the vehicle comes along, lifts it out. But it reduces, you can walk over it, it makes it much more environmentally friendly and tidy.
So, again, part of the review I did in 2020, we looked at examples across the entire world about what other cities were doing, and we did look into this sunken bin approach. And whilst they work in parts of Europe, in central Westminster, in central London, where you only have to go down half a foot before you start hitting electrical gubbins, historical stuff, pipework, Victorian infrastructure, tube network, it really is difficult. I promise you, we have looked into this, and we are still looking at areas where it could be a possibility, but each site has to be looked at, can we actually dig down as far as we need to in the ground in a cost-effective way? Because I think we looked at the possibility of doing it on one particular street, and just digging the hole cost £600,000. That's just digging the hole. So I think we really have to be careful about how we look into it, but that has been looked into.
Going back online, sorry, you've asked 2 questions, and thank you for that. I'm going to try and ask both of them quickly and try and get some short answers as well, given time. So the first question is, will Westminster consider funding and rolling out living green bus shelters known as B-bus stops, presently working well elsewhere in the country? First question, which I think is for Councillor Spencer, and then the second question is, will Westminster consider planting vertical forests on new and high-rise buildings, case in point, a forthcoming Ebury Bridge development to combat pollution, and possibly that one's for the leader? Councillor Spencer. One of my personal priorities is looking at the biodiversity in Westminster and how we can increase greening. So I'm happy to work with Amy and take that up and look into that, yes. Great.
Look, I think this is a great example of just saying we'll look at anything. We'll look at it, might or it might not work in Westminster, but you know, if people have got ideas from elsewhere, I'm not proud. If there's something that works well somewhere else, let's have a look and see if it's something that we can adopt here. There may well be reasons why in a very busy, congested city centre area where it wouldn't work, but we want to look at everything.
Great. Back in the room, I haven't seen any other hands come up. Oh, there we go. Tim.
Pimlico, in Pimlico, their district heating system. That is, I mean, the idea of everybody buying their own heat exchanger is quite complicated, but district heating is going to become a much more potentially useful solution, isn't it? Isn't that something you should be looking at now?
Dave, do you want to?
How long do you have?
I know
so
they're really difficult to install.
Back in January, we were approached by a network of European district heating organisations based out of Copenhagen called VEX, and we've joined that because they know much more about it than we do. It's a really good example of us knowing what we don't know. And it depends upon locality. Ours is a very old one, and actually it's not very environmentally friendly. And particularly the further you get away from the centre, the less environmentally friendly it gets. So if we want to make what we've got carbon neutral, we will have to, over the next year or 3, take quite a lot off. Also, and this has been the same with some of the VEX networks, we're starting to get to the point where for smaller blocks, rather than having it on a CPHU type network, it may be more efficient to have a small, fast electric boiler in a particular building. So but there are places where it won't be. There's no right answer. And the answer is a real mixture of different forms, and the technology is changing so fast. I think that the combined heating power system we've got in Churchill Gardens, and there are smaller ones elsewhere, have a good life in the medium term, but they won't be monolithically what we do entirely in one area. And I tell you, plumbing them is almost impossible at times, you know, and that is a challenge.
Back to the online questions, and Lucy's asked, as part of Westminster City Council's Active Streets strategy, play streets were trialled in Queen's Park in 2020. These were a great success, getting the community active, bringing people together and showing that public streets aren't there solely for traffic. When will these be made permanent? Councillor Spencer.
We're currently looking at all the play streets and school streets. And we're seeing how the ones that we've put in are working at the moment, and the ones that work well we'll look to make permanent. But that's going to involve a conversation with residents and local amenity societies as well.
Great, thank you. Anybody else in the room have any more? Back to you.
Andy Beverley again. Quite a specific question, actually, just going back to cycle hangers. Obviously great to see that cycle hangers are starting to be rolled out, and as you say, there's a huge demand for that. I saw one proposal come out very recently for a cycle hanger. I think it was in Lanark Avenue. I was a little bit mystified. I mean, obviously great to see the proposed cycle hanger, but it's for one street, which has already got lots of car parking, and the proposal is, as well as the cycle hanger for 6 cycles, which takes up half a car parking space, the proposal includes an additional 5 motor vehicle spaces. Given the huge backlog on cycle hangers, I think numbers like 5-10 years, why not put 2-3 cycle hangers in at the cost of 1 or 2 car parking spaces, rather than add in 1 cycle hanger and an additional 5 car parking spaces when there's already lots of car parking in the street?
I'm not sure about that specific case, but it's one we'll take up and look into. But you hit the nail on the head. We need to sort of ramp up cycle hanger provision. It's one of the top issues that come up to me on the doorstep about people not having the space in their flat. Most people live in these small flats. They don't have room to have bikes sitting in the hallway, and even when they are, they're a fire hazard. So we really need to sort of expand this programme. And we have to look at all forms of data as well. We have to look at car usage, we have to look at residential car usage and residential parking permits as well to see where we do have that space, because ultimately it is going to be car parking spaces that are going to be used for it. If
particular one, there's nothing there at the moment, and it's putting in additional 5 car parking spaces and a cycle hanger. So it's not removed, not suggesting...
Let's take that case, yes, and then look at it, yeah.
Great. Very conscious of time, so we'll probably make this the last question in terms of online, but it is a great question to finish on. And the question is going to be for you, Leader. The question is, I'm a huge fan of West End Live. Is there a date set for this year yet?
Well, there is. I'm delighted to be asked about this, actually. So West End Live, I don't know if any of you have been to it, but it's fantastic. It's totally free. Trafalgar Square, 25th of June, do tell the caller, 25th of June this year, 25th and 26th of June. It's totally free. It's a selection of excerpts from all the best West End musicals this year. It was a glorious day and, well, glorious weekend. And there was Hamilton, there was Mamma Mia, there were all the Dear Evan Hansen. I mean, if you're into musicals, you should go to it. Totally free. There's a serious side to this, which is that it's about showcasing the amazing cultural offer in Westminster, making it available for everyone, because it is completely free. People can just go along, queue up, go in. Well, not queue up if you get there at the opening time, but it's totally free for anyone. So it opens the cultural offer to everyone in Westminster. Some people who might not be able to afford to buy tickets, but it also promotes the theatres and what they're offering. So it's brilliant, and I'm delighted to confirm that we've got the date.
Excellent. And would you like to say anything else by way of closing this evening?
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone again for coming physically, but also for attending online. And I think this is a really important debate, and it's been great that people have so many varied questions. This is something of importance for all of us. As I said before, this isn't something where the City Council can lead. I think this is something where we all have to work together. And I'd like to just remind everyone, as I was saying at the beginning, we've got another Climate Action Day here on the 26th of February. So please come. I think it's from 2 o'clock till 5 o'clock. The other thing is we have a monthly newsletter, environment newsletter, which goes out, which talks about the things that we're doing, but it also talks about some of the ideas coming up from communities and other groups that we can share more widely. So if you're interested in the climate action agenda in Westminster, please sign up to the monthly environment newsletter, because actually I think it's something that, it's really important for us to be able to share what we're doing, but also to hear what the communities are doing and what ideas other people can share with us. So I just wanted to sort of promote those two things and thank everyone very much for coming.
Thank you all very much.
Who can't use digital means at all. I've got physical limitations, which mean I just can't do it. And I'm really grateful when there's these kind of meetings on a hybrid format where people can do it online, but I'm not excluded because I can come along. It's really hard work at the moment trying to get this hybrid format across the piece. And I'm really pleased to see Westminster Council leading the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sue. That's a really important point to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.